So if you can click there, the got it box, and that will be it for session agreements. Vesna?
Yes, next slide, please.
Of course, technical issues love to happen. Hello. There you go.
Okay, I kind of freaked out when they told me like 3 minutes before all of you came in that I'm doing the land acknowledge, because I'm like, oh my God, everyone else does such a good job. So here's my attempt at the land acknowledgement. So always encouraged to do a personal land acknowledgement, which is why I freaked out, because I'm like, what do I want to say? So aside from recognizing that we are on Indigenous lands, I want to acknowledge that I am a settler of this land, that I benefit from being on the land as which was taken from people that it belonged to, and that even though I was not part of the original settlers, I am part of the current settlers, and I recognize the need to learn from the past and try to enhance the present and the future, as part of me still living on this land that does not actually belong to me. So aside from that, we recognize that the land on which we gather has been and still is the traditional territory of several Indigenous nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, the Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And that since time immemorial, numerous Indigenous nations and Indigenous peoples have lived and passed through this territory. Next slide, please. So reminders, okay, thank you. So please continue to book time with Nora and Diego. We are, believe it or not, under 3 weeks away from the wrap up of the program. And this Thursday, we have our legal bootcamp session in partnership with Owner. This is a session that's also open to the public, so it's not just for the small group of SIC. It is also a session that got a lot of interest. A lot of people signed up for it. Even the waiting list is full. And so you folks get first dibs. Obviously, you didn't have to register. So please make sure that you do arrive on time. Because we're going to actually, any empty slots, any unfilled slots, we will start opening it up to members of the public. So make sure that you're here and you claim your spot, your virtual spot, because there's a ton of interest in the session this Thursday. And even though it's not on here, but the session next Tuesday, so a week today, on climate change, that one is also open to the public, and that one we will have to start 6 sharp. It's only an hour, and we have external partners with very high expectations, to say the least. So we'll start right on time for next week Tuesday. So please ensure that you're here slightly before 6 for us to start. Also, your business plan is due July 24th, which is this Sunday. So make sure that, and there are templates on Slate. So please make sure that you follow through with that. You're also welcome to get feedback, ask for feedback, or if you have any specific questions on it, you can message us. You can also ask your mentors to help you kind of frame certain areas, certain parts of the available templates to make it more fitting for your venture's focus. Am I missing anything on the reminders?
I think we have it all.
Thank you. And is it back to Marisol now?
Yes. So before go on, I just want to share with everybody here how excited we are, Besma and I, in introducing our facilitators for this session, Erica and Sanjana. So I would like to say a few words about their expertise, if they allow me. Erica is currently pursuing her BBA and has over 8 years of experience in business. Currently, her professional efforts are oriented to advancing the HR field in creating equitable experiences. She blends her experience and academic skills of communications and digital engagement with a year of integrating equity, diversity, and inclusion grounded learning supports in the impact entrepreneurship field, collaborating with both public and private sectors, fueled by her passion to create experiences and nurture spaces that elicit a sense of grounding and belonging both online and offline. Thank you, Erica. And Sanjana has a bachelor's in management studies and is currently pursuing her business analysis and process management graduate certificate. She has multiple certifications such as in consumer analytics, Excel fundamentals for data analysis, and effective problem solving and decision making. She has deep experience and understanding in stakeholder communications, entrepreneurship, and international marketing. And in addition, her work intersects with social justice and equity issues in international initiatives oriented to social innovation. Thank you both for bringing your expertise to this space, virtual space with us. And we are honored to have you here at Edge sharing with us.
You make us sound so amazing. So, thank you so much for that introduction. Just to reiterate what Marisol was saying, I'm so happy to be here tonight with everyone to talk about justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. For myself, I believe it's not just about having it within your venture and within your business. I feel like a lot of these practices can be taken alongside with you on your everyday life. And I hope the pre-work and from tonight's session and hearing everyone's experiences and what these definitions mean to you shed some light into not only in your venture, but being an ally in the future. Sanjana?
Hi. So thanks for the lovely introduction, Marisol. I almost didn't recognize that it was my introduction. So, I mean, I wanted to start by introducing myself, but on a more personal note. Like, I am doing my co-op term with Edge right now, but I am from India and I just came to Canada in October of 2021. And I can say that was one of the most daunting experiences of my life. And I come from Mumbai, which is a cosmopolitan city, what we call in India, which means that in India, there are a lot of different regions and every region has a very unique culture in itself. So we may not have people of different races, but we have different barriers and distinctions of our own. So we do call Mumbai a cultural mosaic, which means that there are people of different cultures, but they maintain their culture, which as opposed to the other concept, which is a melting pot, where we say that there are different people of different cultures who come in, but then they have to adapt to what that society or like the place that they go to and adapt to that culture and kind of, wash away their unique or like where their backgrounds and what makes them unique. And one of the reasons why I chose to come to Canada instead of going to some of the other countries which provided just as good academic and culture and career opportunities was because Canada is also I was told that Canada is also a cultural mosaic, which meant that I would be able to retain my roots and use what I know and what my culture has taught me and made me today to further my career or contribute to the society over here, which, as Besma mentioned, I do recognize that I'm a settler in Canada, so I do wish to use any opportunity that I get to make sure that I pass it on to somebody else and make Canada as a country and as a place, a society, a much better place. So on a personal front, in India, one of the main reasons why I would say feel discriminated against, even though I do acknowledge that I was quite privileged coming from a good from a good economic background, where my parents were well off. So I was given a lot of opportunities. I had access to education. But one thing that always kind of kept reappearing in my life was that I was a woman. And in India, women don't have as access to as many opportunities as men do. That can be seen in colleges where, suppose mechanical engineering, as opposed to 100 students in a class, there would be like 5 women who are there in that class, because it is perceived as a more male dominated field. And that goes on for so many different fields, construction, even architecture to a point was believed to be a male dominated academic and a career front. So yeah, when I came to Canada, I was very determined that I would take whatever I learned here, go back to my country, and if use what I learned here in terms of equity and diversity, and apply it to places back home, because I think that I am obligated to make that change and pass on the opportunities to others. And with that very long introduction, I would like to now start the discussion. And as Marisol and Desma mentioned, and even Erica mentioned, this session is going to be very discussion heavy. So I invite you all to unmute your mics and voice your opinions wherever you think you have something to say. If you are comfortable keeping your webcams on, I would encourage you to do so, because it would lead to more honest and heart-to-heart conversations. So the topic for today: justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Four very different, four principles that go hand in hand, but have very unique meanings. Um, a very famous quote that is used in a lot of places it was originally said by Verna Myers, who said that diversity is being invited to a party and inclusion is being asked to dance. And then I read somewhere, which it was, kind of built upon that justice would be if the rules stated that no one can be excluded from the party, and equity would be, say, offering transportation to people who live very far away so that they could make it to that party. And so with that example, I think, Erica, could we share the... So now I invite all of you to reflect upon what equity as a term means to you. And it could be a personal definition, or how you see you applying it to your venture. We would really like it if you could come and contribute to this discussion. Any of you?
Feel free to unmute yourself as well too. As well. Otherwise, we will pick people on the list. Zara says.
Okay. Yeah, Zara said definitely equal rights.
Hello.
Hi.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. For me, equity is not only just everyone having like equal access to a thing, but any intrinsic barriers to accessing that thing are broken down. The example I know of is like the fence example, where instead of giving people like the right number of boxes so they can stand on to see over the fence, you replace the fence with one that you can just see through so that no one needs any extra help.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example. Thank you so much. Anyone else would like to unmute and contribute? We have a few in the chat. Sayad said it's equal opportunity. Zara said, which means some groups may get more support than others due to past oppression. Yes. Laiba said, where people get what they need. Hannah said, yeah, the box cartoon is the main thing I can think of. And Willie agreed with her. Okay, thank you so much, guys. Anyone else? Any other? Okay, Benjamin said, equality is subjective to each individual's perspective. Yes, definitely. Would you like to elaborate on that, Benjamin?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Okay. Yeah. So when I say that, I think like, okay, there's equality and then there's equity, right? So I would look at equality as like it's like a goal to make it equal for everyone, right? But if it's equity specifically, it's like each person is being fairly treated, right? So each person is being fairly compensated. It's not just like one class is being compensated over another one. It's like each person based on their needs, based on their desires, based on, their own specific class, they are getting compensated in a fair and like genuinely equal way. That's basically what I mean.
Oh, that's a lovely explanation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a
Anyone?
suggestion.
Yeah.
I've noticed that because we have a large body of people in the community that has multiple opinions as to how things should go, what should be done, what is right, what is wrong, they had to find a way that inclusively included everyone's thoughts, everyone's opinions, to at least have a common ground in the workplace, in common areas. I'm looking at the definition of what it says, even though it says the quality of being fair and impartial, right? The law creates an opportunity for every individual person who may be lacking the knowledge or experience or strength to be able to speak for themselves, an opportunity to come find a common ground, find a perspective that they believe in or think about, and being able to bring it to the table to people who would listen to them so that they feel comfortable in their own skin, feel comfortable in their own perspective, feeling comfortable with what they they would like to accomplish in their life. So equality is including, I guess, issues that each and issues that each and every person may find themselves dealing with when they find themselves in common areas, to allow, I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. I mean, very good points that you made. Um, I think Benjamin already touched upon this, the difference between equality and equity. Does anyone else want to maybe talk about their perspective of that, of whether equality is the what should be promoted, or equity is what should be promoted, or what you think is the line between those two? Okay. I So yeah, I think all of you covered it amazingly. Equity is where there is not only equal opportunity, but where we acknowledge that some people don't have that the playing field isn't even, isn't level. So not everyone is at the same level, and some people need to be given extra resources to help them access those opportunities or make good on those opportunities. And this kind of leads us into the second term that we have, which is diversity. So, again, your inputs on what you think diversity means to you, or just any inputs are welcome. Anyone? What comes to your mind when you think of diversity? Like when you hear the term diversity, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
I guess I'll go. It was similar to what I was referring to before about equality. I'm looking at the definition. It says showing a great deal of variety, and given the fact that we are living in a multicultural environment, different backgrounds, different perspectives, different opinions. There's females, there's males that have, there's transgenders, there's a lot of different diversity, complexities in our community. So it's speaking to that and tying it to equality, to be able to, as individuals in common areas, to identify these indifferences, to appreciate them, to respect them, even though that they are not the same as yours or not the same as mine, but to be open to the fact that there is a great deal of variety, very different things. It includes involving people, ranges from social, ethnic backgrounds and sexual orientations and so on and so forth. So similar to what I was saying before with the equality, one can't have equality if one is not willing to appreciate that person or respect the diversity of themselves, the way that they look, the way that they're shaped, the way that they dress, how their hair looks, earrings, nose earrings, whatever these things that an individual has decided at that particular point, that is how they identify themselves to be, is a first step in the direction to be able to be considered not to be considered diverse, but we already are diverse, but to consciously be aware of that. So when we are in common areas or we're trying to establish businesses that are involving other people, these things go hand in hand. You need to have equalities, to be aware of the diversity that we are a part of, and therefore the individuals who may be presented to you or looking to work with you of some sort, accordingly to what the definition says in the dictionary. But that would be my take on it.
Sorry to interrupt, Sean. I just want to thank you for your contribution. I just want to check what venture are you part of? Because this is actually a closed workshop. So I just want to double check if you're working with one of the social impact catalyst ventures.
I got in contact with Onar, I believe it is. Did I turn off my video? Sorry. I'm in contact with Owner, and Owner was through York University. There was a entrepreneurial hub, and through the hub, I was connected to these programs, I believe it was. And I believe that, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but York University, being a student and me wanting to pursue entrepreneurship, they had sent me a link for the meeting that we are currently in now, and I believe so. And that's why I'm here now. Hopefully I'm in the right meeting. I just know I have a link, and it is, I can go into the email if you want me to, but I don't have that in front of me, but I can. But I believe that's where.
Yeah, if you don't mind, just to know how, because this is, we haven't actually shared the link outside of the group that's part of the program. So just for my own knowledge to know how,
okay, no
how the
problem.
link made it out, that would be awesome. I'll send you my email in the chat privately. So if you don't mind forwarding that to me, please.
Yeah, not a problem. I will definitely do that. And it's Bisam.
Basma, I'll
Basma.
type out my email in a second. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Basma.
Back to you, Sanjana.
Yeah. So some of the other definitions that have been added to the chat, Hannah said, letting all types of people be a part of the group. Benjamin said, embracing each person's unique qualities that can define their identity. Wile said, different perspectives, races, social class, genders, age, having people who represent all varying differences of mankind. Hannah also added going beyond not enforcing a single way to live, think, but also encouraging and celebrating differences. So here, I think one of the things that is happening is diversity and inclusion are kind of being merged into one. So Hannah's first definition, which was letting all types of people be a part of the group, and Ruile's definition of having people who represent different represent all the varying differences of mankind. I think those are more related to diversity, while the other two definitions that are in the chat speak more to inclusion, which is kind of our next definition that we were going to look into. So just to be clear, diversity is more of a quantitative, almost a quantitative approach where it is making sure that there are people from different backgrounds and demographics that are invited to the table so that there are different perspectives. So it is making sure that there are different people at the table. That is what diversity is, which is and the definitions are a good segue into our next topic, which is inclusion. And again, if anyone would like to unmute their mics and talk about what inclusion is, I think some of it has already been discussed, where it is when Hannah said not enforcing a single way to think, but also encouraging and celebrating differences. I think the terms encouraging and celebrating differences are very important when defining what, or like talking about what inclusion could mean. Even embracing each other's unique qualities, that is also something that would come under inclusion. If any of you have any specific ways that you think that inclusion could be a part of your work culture or organizations, we have Zara who wrote in the chat, definitely taking steps to understand diverse perspectives, like through workshops like these. Yeah, definitely. It's about understanding different people's perspectives, because it is not enough to just have those people come to the table. It is making sure that they are given an opportunity to talk, to present their views, to make sure that their views are actually listened to and not just heard and ignored. And it is about giving them the opportunities to make good on those views and putting them into action, giving them the resources. Saihaj wrote, establishing, fostering, and upholding behaviors and circumstances that support and permit each of us to be fully ourselves. Amazing. I think that's an amazing definition for inclusion. Wule also said, honoring different religious or cultural holidays, for example, rather than traditional westernized holidays only. That's a very good example of how inclusion, what inclusion could look like in an organization. Anyone else about any other ideas of what inclusion could look like in an organization, whether it's an academic organization or a entrepreneurial venture or even a big MNC? Anyone, any thoughts?
I would say for inclusivity or inclusion, I would say the having, not only is it being like acceptance of letting people of different ages and stuff like that come in and to that extent, but also having the culture within the organization that supports other people and other groups of people coming in, where essentially it's not an issue, right? Because I know if you have a workplace where the culture is very like one ethnicity or one gender, having other people who challenge that come in kind of creates a bit of a them versus us kind of situation. I think having that culture that accepts everyone and welcomes them, no matter their disability, age, ethnicity, gender, right, is what kind of helps create a more inclusive culture within an organization and helps, I mean, in theory, at least, it should help organizations grow and perform better.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of studies that have been done which show that having people from different backgrounds and diversity and allowing those people to involving them in the important decisions of an organization have significantly impacted the performance of the organization, because just it kind of helps defeat groupthink, and having that one mainstream, it challenges that mainstream idea. and it leads to discussion and conversations that need to be had. So yeah, I definitely agree with you, Alex. Um, does anyone else have anything to add? One of the okay, John wrote, inclusion should involve psychological safety. 100% agree with that. Allowing those that wish to participate to feel free and safe to share their ideas. I definitely agree with that. Benjamin also said inviting others to become part of an idea or community without segregation. Yeah, I think one of the most interesting examples that I found when I was looking into inclusion was an Ivy League college. When they first started allowing women to give their entrance tests in 1973, they that was diversity, where they said, okay, now we start allowing women to appear for the exam and they get an opportunity, or they can compete to enter our college and be admitted into our college. But where they kind of fumbled was on the inclusion part, where they did not have the resources or infrastructure that was needed to support these women. So when they came in to give the entrance exam, there were no washrooms for them. So they had to go across the street to the washroom and then come back if they ever had to use the washroom in the middle of the exam. So a study which was conducted showed that an average woman had 15 to 20 minutes lesser than the male counterpart for the same examination. So while there was diversity, inclusion not so much. But yeah, those that college then went on to learn from its mistake, and now is very inclusive. But yeah, that is just one of the examples that popped into my head. Moving on to the next definition that we have, and that is justice. Any of you have any thing to add about what you think justice means, or what it would look like, or what it does look like in today's workplaces and organizations? Stephanie also added disability inclusion, understanding the relationship between the way people function and how they participate in an activity. 100%. That does contribute. Should be a factor that is thought about in inclusion. Anyone wants to add anything about justice? What they think justice means? Anyone? Any thoughts? So the definition of justice is that there are, okay, Zara added to the chat saying creating resources to combat oppression. Yep, it is that. It is more of a systemic, or like a more formal approach, where it is like giving people the right and creating the structure, the formal structure that is needed to create diversity and to make the organization more inclusive. Hannah added acknowledging and teaching history, I think, is an important part, definitely. Zara also added it goes in hand with equity, but here we actively work towards bringing the support needed to have equal rights. Yes, it is. It does speak a lot to rights and rules and formal structures. Um, Anyone else? Do they have any thoughts on what justice means or what it could look like? Stephanie said, according to the OED, just behavior or treatment. Stephanie, would you like to elaborate on that? Oh, okay. Oh, it's just like justice. Oh, I'm sorry. My bad. Um, Benjamin said fair treatment for all people regardless of their differences. Yep. So I think we did cover all the definitions of the 4 different words. Um, Now I would invite you all to think about your own ventures that you have in place right now and what you think you could do in your own venture to apply these principles, how you could ensure that there is diversity, that the people who are brought to the table are given an opportunity to talk, what would justice look like in your organization, and how could you create an equitable environment. So I think this is something that all of you could add something to, but even if it's just a sentence, please, I encourage you all to think about this, because even though it may feel like it is something that you know and like it's there, like it's in the back of your mind, it's always there. This is a very crucial stage for your venture where you're creating your work culture, and the tone that you set now is a tone that is likely to be, trickled down through your organization as it becomes um, larger and more people come in. So I encourage you to, unmute your mics and talk about what it would look like in your organization and in your venture. Would any of you like to contribute to that?
I would
Hello?
say- Oh, go ahead.
Oh, so, sorry, are you sure?
No, you can go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, so for us, I would say it's mostly about because we're making games, so I would say it's making games while keeping in mind the different kinds of cultures that we're going to connect with, and the different kinds of people that we're going to be working with. In a very generic and simple way, that's how I would say it.
Yep, that definitely in terms of customers, diverse. Yeah, these principles are very important. Alex, what were you going to say?
Yeah, so I would say for refilling in the future, obviously right now, the funds are a little limited and you can only do so much. But I think in the future, something that I would like to include would be kind of hiring blindly, if that makes sense, without having a specific like no name, no nothing, just having their resume and then having a story of what they do, how they think, and so I don't have any unknown biases that everyone has their own biases, no matter how righteously we are, like it doesn't matter, we all have our own biases. So I think putting barriers in front of that to stop yourself without knowing is key. As well, like for my businesses, I'll like for my service, so for the refill services, I think having our instructions in multiple different languages um, could help kind of break down the barrier and give access to people of all cultures. Because currently we're looking at Mississauga as our target market, and there's actually like, I think it's like 56% of Mississauga natives or people who live here are immigrants, right? So there's a large majority of different ethnicities that maybe don't speak the language as well as they could, or they would feel more comfortable reading it in another language. And so having that as well. And then finally, I would say providing our service in a tiered kind of cost system where it's depending on where it's located, right? Having a different pricing and even potentially selection as well to kind of cater to that market. Obviously, that'll take a lot more data to know, okay, this market has a more, let's say, Indian population, so they require a different type of product and their pricing may be different, or kind of tailoring it to where we are to kind of provide that openness. Because currently we're looking at co-ops, which is more like affordable living, and so we'll have to adjust our pricing to provide the people living there the ability to actually purchase our product. Because if we price it at $10 a bottle, it's not very inclusive to people who don't have the money or the economic standing to even afford that on the day-to-day, right? So just making those adjustments and being aware, I think that's probably the best we could do for right now, at least.
I absolutely love how many bases you have covered. I mean, internally and externally, I love it. In the chat, we have Vuyule, who's written, ensuring the clothes I sell are affordable for people who aren't financially able to buy somewhere else because of their socioeconomic status. Amazing. And Sehad said, having a diverse team that includes individual and organizational characteristics, beliefs, values, and backgrounds, and also promoting the full participation and sense of belonging of every team member. Amazing. Thank you. And Stephanie has raised her hand. Do you want to? Yeah.
So the whole point of our organization is to help people with disabilities. And so we will be providing resources to make their lives easier. But we've also set up an opportunity to bring people on board to help run the organization who have various disabilities, not necessarily the one that we're looking at providing resources for, but it gives them an opportunity to contribute to the overall functioning and working at a pace that is something that they are able to do. So working with the individual rather than just setting forward unrealistic goals.
That's amazing. I mean, I love all the contributions. Anyone else want to add anything? Okay. Then I think we can move on to the next activity that we have planned. I hope that all of you have a pen and paper handy or like some form of writing device where you can just do this activity. I'll give you a minute to get your pen and papers ready. Erica, if we could
Yes,
share.
sure. I was including Ecogen on here as well too. And
Oh, sorry.
no
Thank
worries.
you.
No worries. And I just want to add as well too, I love how everyone is being including different policies and procedures for themselves for Jedi. So that's great. These are all great.
Okay, so on your piece of paper, I want you to write down the names of 10 people that you trust the most. And I would prefer it if these people, we would prefer it if these people weren't your family members. And, you know, just make a list of 10 people whom you would trust in any situation. And leave some space on the right side to include more information. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 columns to the right of the names. I'll give you till 6:53 to write down the names of the 10 people.
Or maybe type into the chat for everyone that is ready to go and have done 10 members or 10 people.
Yep.
Just say ready into the chat.
Yeah.
So not family members, right?
Not family
No.
members. Oh, sorry, you're done. Wow. I love that. I love how you already have 10 people on the top of your head. Like, I know who I trust. That's great. That's great. I would, oh my gosh, really, as well too. Trust with what? I know that is a good question. A lot of my friends, oh, I love that. That's great.
Trust with what? Like just maybe if you have a pet, you would leave your pet with them. Like I think that's a good level of trust.
Okay.
No one gets her pets. Okay, done. Okay, I think we have quite a few people who are done with it.
I think we're
Three.
still waiting for a couple
Yep.
people. Just to make sure that I think Alex, Alan, Andrew, I think, yeah, we're still.
Alan is done. I think.
Benjamin as well. Don's done. Cool. Hannah's done. Great. Hamza.
Alex is done. David is done. Hannah gave a thumbs up. So
Cool. Great.
yeah, I think so now we have a short video for you to see. And then we'll move on to the next part of the activity.
Okay. I think I might have not did the
Yeah, the audio is very
audio.
If you just turn the volume button up at the top of that video, I think it might work.
I think I haven't turned on my the share sound function. So that should work now. Cue the Jeopardy music. Sorry about the technical difficulties. My computer likes to act up when it knows that, okay. Almost there.
We're ready to dive into a conversation about a topic we're all really familiar with, and that's the topic of trust. I'll give you a worksheet in a minute, and it's folded for a reason because I'd like to invite you not to open up the worksheet. And down this left-hand column is a space for you to jot first names or initials of people that fit that category of people you trust. Think about who are the people that you would say you trust, and as much as possible, don't put family members. By looking around, most of you have your first column filled out, so let's move to part 2 of the activity. So if you open up the worksheet, you'll see across the top is a variety of diversity dimensions. So what I'd like to invite you to do is just go through the names of that first column and code them by their diversity. So if they're a male, put an M in gender. If they're a female, put F. And you'll get the hang of just coming up with your own code. And notice what you notice as you go through the process. I want to give you I don't know if you'd call it a model. It's kind of a way that we'd like you to think about this phenomenon of how people work their way into your trusted 10. So just kind of think of level 1 trust is folks that you are just getting to know or that you're acquainted with. This is always the biggest number of people we know. It's people we're familiar with. So over time, folks wind their way at work across, and it's a gradation, it's almost degrees, into this second level. If we use time and relationship building, then people move into, my really bad acronym is COMFY. and that's come over to my front yard. And that list of people, I would say, have moved beyond I know their name to they're people that I would trust in my house and in my yard. Usually about 10% of this outer circle that we actually feel comfortable with. So the trust is growing there. Those people we trust more. And then we move into that, inner sanctum that we'll call trust. Maybe it's the trusted 10, maybe it's the trusted 20. This is the most diverse group of people in my life. For you too, right? This is it kind of thins out a little bit there. And then we move into our trusted 10. And for most of us, we see the least amount of diversity in that circle. When I have a chance to give somebody, I'll call it a sexy assignment. It's a high visibility project, access to senior leaders. Really, it's maybe a stretch assignment. Am I going to go to the people on my team at this level? Most people would say that they're going to be moving up into this zone or probably into this zone. And so the implication for us as an organization, right, is if we keep giving the good opportunities, promotions, stretch assignments to folks that are up in this zone, then what's going to probably happen with diversity on your team? We're going to keep replicating people that see the world more like we do. When you go back to your team, when you go back to being an amazing leader, what are some conscious things that you might do over the next weeks or days to take what you learned about the like me bias and put it into practice? The more we're able to talk about the like me bias and how it might be influencing our decision making, the more we take this from the unconscious to the conscious.
I think the main, so the second part of the activity is code the next I'm sorry, word vomit. In the columns next to the names, make the columns for gender, race/ethnicity, then age, and the other categories that appear on the screen, the marital status, and sexual orientation. I think those are the categories. And just code them. Like if it's a man, if it's a male, put M. If it's a female, put S. If there's heterosexual, maybe an H, and so on and so forth. And just this is we won't ask you to share your findings, but this is just a reflective activity where maybe you can see that there is some kind of a pattern over there. Because it's not just about as a leader and an entrepreneur that you are, it's about giving opportunity to people or having people who are different from you and bringing different perspectives to the table. So yeah, so just give you maybe a minute or two, maybe till 7:03 for you to complete this activity and reflect upon it before we move on to the next section.
After you determine the components of every single person that is on your trusted 10, if there's anyone that would like to share on what they found, like if your trusted 10 was very similar to you, or if there was anyone different on your list, so we would love to hear that as well too.
I mean, this activity definitely called me out and forced me to reflect on myself, because there was definitely a pattern over there that there were more of a specific, like all the race and ethnicity were like Indians, and then age was more around my age group. They were all educated, no one with a disability. I mean, there were a few with a disability, but yeah, so there was definitely a pattern in mine, and that was, I mean, surprising because I make it a point to interact, but then you do realize that the people who are in the circle of trust are more of the same kind of people. Zara said, "Oh wow, this activity has me thinking. I just noticed a lot of my trusted friends are female and from the same culture as myself." Same, Zara, same.
Yes, and same thing with me as well too. Most of my trusted 10 are definitely female. And I think that just goes to our humanity side where we want to just stick to what feels comfortable to us. And so hopefully this activity makes you think of going beyond that and diversing your trusted 10.
Anyone else would like to share?
Yeah, I have a question regarding disability. And again, this is a really touchy subject for a lot of people. There are people who have like mental disabilities like anxiety and such, and those are invisible and you cannot see those, versus somebody who's walking around with a cane or a walker or a wheelchair. So unless you know the person really well, it's almost impossible to diagnose that condition. And a lot of people who have disabilities that can sort of function in life and society say, well, I'm not on any sort of governmental disability, so therefore I am not legally disabled. So, like, how do you define that? Because it is such a broad interpretive category.
Yeah, I think that in specific for disability, I feel like that is like a huge deep dive topic that we can definitely get into, because like you said, it is a lot of it is not visible. And I think that there needs to be a conversation about that. There's also like the addiction side to that as well too. With that, I think if you had that conversation with that person that has said that they have like a mental disability or a physical one, feel free to put yes. But like you said, it is very hard to diagnose that. And I think with the science, I mean, you can go into a full conversation about how science is still developing all of that. And that's the thing with JEDID and with justice, equity, and inclusion, is that we need to continue to learn about it. And we need to continue to do research on these topics, because I don't think there is ever going to be like a designation of like, I know justice, equity, inclusion, diversity, all that stuff. But I don't think there's ever going to be an endpoint. I think it needs to continue to be learned and talked about. And having this conversation right now is like super important. And having that having the space to have this conversation is super important as well too. I don't know if anyone wants to jump in on this, but yeah, I feel like I can go on about this. But yeah.
I definitely think one thing that we could have done differently was write known disability, because as she highlighted, not everyone is open. So that's something that we learned and that we will definitely incorporate in our further, if we ever do this activity again. Thank you so much for bringing that to our notice and talking about it.
I will say, like, like obviously the disability thing is something that's pretty touchy. I noticed, at least for myself, like I don't know how many of the people have like I know they don't have a visible disability, obviously. I don't know if they have a mental one. But what I noticed in my circle was it's either like white in terms of Canadian white or European, or that coupled with black, which is either Jamaican or Nigerian. And it's like pretty much 50-50 male and female, but it's only those like, oh, and Latin as well. So it's kind of like only those three cultures, which is, I guess, interesting. I mean, I feel I'm surprised. I think pre-university it was pretty much predominantly white. But now, you know, I've branched out a little, I guess. Yeah, but I guess there's some blind spots, right? Because from my understanding, none of them are part of, like, for example, the LGBTQ community. None of them, from my understanding, have a disability. Most of them are not married. They're like in the age range of 22 to like 40, in that range, like mostly in the early 30s to early 20s. But yeah, maybe I should probably have a couple more Asian regional, you know, people in there, whether it's Indian, Chinese, Filipino, right, Thai, whatever, they, you know, broaden it a little, but that's just me.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I think, yeah, I think the first step is being aware and just, realizing that and acknowledging that. So I think you're all, half the battle is won over there. Thank you for sharing again. Anyone else that would like to share? Wheeler said in the chat, interesting. I have mostly females, but do have a diversity in cultures/ethnicity. If no one else is comfortable with sharing, I think we can move on to the next part.
I think this is the time where we ask if people want a break, how they're feeling. I know this subject is can be quite hard depending on your experiences. So feel free to let us know how you're feeling. So if you would like a break, if you don't like a break, I think we have a poll to see how people are feeling. Oh, 50-50. Oh. It's so fun watching from this end. See everyone. Okay, waiting a couple more. Okay. All right. So it looks like it's mostly a no. So we'll get to it and go on the next one. Oh. Before we start this activity, I do want to go back and make sure everyone is feeling good and how they're feeling so far. Seeing if there's any like thumbs ups just to make sure that everyone's okay. Oh, okay. Oh, geez. So sorry. Technical difficulties. I love this. Okay. Okay, so implementing the JEDID, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. I think Alex kind of already touched upon this earlier when he was saying about having to implement it in his hiring practices. But having biases is something that we need to be more aware of, and then specifically for unconscious bias. Just a little bit of a recap of what conscious bias and unconscious bias is. So conscious bias refers to biased attitudes that you are aware of, and we know we're being biased and we're doing it intentionally. There can be malicious intent and can be easily observed. With unconscious bias, it refers to biased attitudes that operate outside your awareness and your control. So going back to the circle of 10, your trusted 10, how depending on your gender, you might have seen that you had specific people within the same gender that was in the circle of 10. So that is something that is outside of your awareness and control. That we hold biased attitudes for certain things. Usually there's no malicious intent and can't be easily observed. So when it comes to unconscious bias, you may think like, why do we need to be more aware of it? And on your entrepreneurial journey, you'll have to interact with multiple people in the future, and having this awareness can really help you and how you interact with other people, with other founders, how you network with people, how you diverse the people around you. It can also be implemented on your social media, how consumers see your brand, how consumers see your venture. And most importantly, like I said at the beginning, I think it's super important for us to have this awareness of unconscious biases as human beings. So going into the activity, we're going to go into a Google Jamboard. And we're going to go down the list of unconscious biases that you may have had in the past. Obviously, like in that chart, it's hard to observe and it's hard to be aware of it. So you may not be able to come up with an experience yourself where you had done an unconscious bias. So we're going to go through that definition, reflect on any past experiences that you may have had with that specific unconscious bias. And we're going to figure out ways together to avoid that specific unconscious bias. I'm going to share this link into the chat so we can all follow along together if you would like. Does anyone have any questions so far before I start it?
Erica, I'll share the link in the chat.
Ah, thank you. Perfect. Cool. Does anyone have any questions before we get into this? Okay, so again, getting that pen and paper handy, so that way you're able to reflect on your own past experiences, maybe just acknowledging if you've had those unconscious biases before. I know that it is hard to reflect on yourself. I know sometimes even myself doing this Jamboard, it can be quite difficult to look within yourself to see that, oh, I've done this unintentionally. So yeah, feel free to type or write down your own reflections as we go through each unconscious bias. So number one, gender bias. I think we already touched upon this, but it is the favoring of one gender over another. Is often referred to as sexism. This bias occurs when someone unconsciously associates certain stereotypes with different genders. This type of bias may affect recruitment practices and relationship dynamics. An example of this bias during hiring is if the hiring panel favors male candidates over female candidates, even though they have similar skills and job experience. I know that this is example can be hard to apply towards your own ventures because you are in that startup stage. But when you are going on to this journey, you are going to be experiencing it with whole bunch of other people within like freelancers or different co-founders as well too, or other founders within the space. So feel free to take a second to reflect on if you've done this gender bias before, or if you've experienced it as well. Okay, so with this definition, how do you think we can avoid gender biases? And feel free to type it into the chat or unmute yourself. And think in the sense of how you can do it within your own venture or even within your everyday lives.
Do you want us to write it down somewhere, or do you want us to?
Yeah, to say it out loud or to type it into the chat.
Okay, so I would say for like in this regards to sexism, right?
Sexism, gender biases that we may have as we're like interacting with other people. Like how can we avoid that gender bias?
Yeah, I would say depending on your gender, I think hiring someone in a leadership position of the opposite gender, I think will help balance out a lot of the biased opinions you have. So if you're a woman, hiring a male in a leadership position can help balance out those beliefs that, you know, because a lot it tends, at least from my experience, it tends to women like to stick with women a lot of times when they hire, and so that oftentimes leads sexism on the other end as well, right? And so I think by hiring someone of the opposite gender and vice versa for males too, it kind of creates a more balance, especially if it's like a top leadership position. It kind of creates a more even playing field for your organizations to go off. That's how it goes.
That's great. Thank you. Anyone else? Otherwise, I will pick on some people. I did come up with a couple of avoidances that we can think of. So another thing with gender bias is that maybe there are some words out there. I feel like there is a lot of words out there that have a gender connotation to it, like usually with male words or with some words, there's like a you picture a man, or with some other words you picture a female. So being aware of like how you describe people and making sure that it is like gender let me see, gender neutral. So gender neutral, making sure that we don't have certain connotations of words to be more female oriented or male oriented. So being aware of that. Viewing resumes with names removed so you don't know what the gender potential candidate is. Yes, so that is very important as well. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Names to perfect. Thank you so much. So another one is creating diversity goals, setting a qualitative gender. Diversity goals to create a more gender balanced team, like what Alex was saying. Support and provide resources for women to take on leadership roles. Same thing with within males if it is a more female workplace as well. Setting gender neutral requirement standards, define the ideal candidate profile ahead of time and evaluate all candidates against those standards. That is another way for avoidance. Does anyone else to add to gender bias?
I just added one that says by substituting the other gender and seeing if our perspective changes. For example, would I find this unprofessional if it was a man doing it instead of a woman?
Thank you, Sanjana. Okay, so going on to the next one. So the next one is, they are kind of all interconnected with one another. It is the halo effect / beauty bias. And then on the other hand, there is the horns effect. So the halo effect occurs when we develop an overall positive impression of someone because of one of their qualities or traits. This effect may lead us to inadvertently put people on a pedestal since we're constructing an image of a person based on limited information. Beauty bias refers to the favorable treatment and positive stereotyping of individuals who are considered more attractive. The horns effect is the opposite of the halo beauty or bias effect. The horns effect causes us to have a negative impression of someone based on one trait or experience. Putting too much weight on a single trait or interaction with someone can lead to inaccurate and unfair judgments of their character. Oh, that's good. Is that referring to Sanjana's input? Yes, perfect. Yes, it is very good. Okay. So taking a moment to reflect if maybe you've done this in the past. Again, I know it's hard to dive deep into oneself. I know that I've done both. And I think in the Western culture, I think there's a huge thing with beauty bias and especially with the Western culture, I feel like there's like a standard of beauty as well too. So I often even bias towards myself and how I put myself out there. But
I even think the pace of our like work culture and like just our lives in general, like we're so fast paced that sometimes we are used to making snap judgments and being like, okay, this is the information I have. I have to make a decision based on this. But then we forget that that should not always be the case. And sometimes we need to consciously pause and reflect. And then, so this is one of those biases.
mm-hmm. Yes, so that is one way to avoid it, is to have an awareness of it. Taking a moment to decide, not quick judging. And for Stephanie, an example of the halo effect is, say if you heard, usually with education, we usually like to put a standard, I guess, with education. And some people might hear that a person graduated from an Ivy League school. When you hear that someone graduated from an Ivy League school, unconsciously, you might think, oh, they'll be really good because they went to Harvard or something like that. Because we already have that unconscious thought that they would be better at everything because they went to a pretentious school. Does that give an example?
Not exactly, because a lot of times when those people are graduating from Ivy League schools, they are usually doing better because it's harder to get into, so they're at a different level.
Yes.
Sorry to throw down your idea or your example.
100%. But say if one person was coming from an Ivy League school and another person was coming from a non-Ivy League school, you may think that the Ivy School person is better because they came from an Ivy League school, but doesn't necessarily mean that they would be the best in that scenario. And especially when it comes to, if you look at the entire world, not everyone can go to an Ivy League school. And that goes back to like the equity background, is that not everyone has the resources to go into an Ivy League school or have the finances to go to an Ivy League school. But what if they, I don't know, going to their background, did some research or was in that experience of that specific like expertise or field. I'm not like looking into like doctors or anything like that, but say for business or something like that. Hopefully that.
I would add on to that as well. Something that I think is often overlooked in regards to Ivy League and like higher end universities is that a lot of the professors teach at lower universities as well. Same with colleges, right? So, and we use the same textbooks, we use the same professors. Literally the only thing that separates a lot, at least nowadays, I don't know how it was back in the day, a lot of what separates currently the students is just the application process and the school name, right? Because if we study from the same professors, the same textbook, we do pretty much the same assignments, what is the real difference, right? So I think a lot of times there's a lot of people who kind of just survive at UFT, let's say, but they didn't excel, right? But because they graduated from UFT, they are held to the same standard as everyone within that program, while there's a clear distinction between the top and the bottom of each class, right? And that same goes for any other school, right? So only because someone graduated from UFT, I would probably bet that individual is not going to perform as well as someone who graduated from a lower end school who ended up being top of his class, if that makes sense.
I can give an example actually based on something I personally faced. I've been in spaces where people approach me speaking English very slowly, or they assume that I don't speak English because they associated how I look with a whole set of stereotypes in their head. So I tend to have fun in these kind of situations and then respond to them with the most academic English I've ever spoken in my life. But I mean, that's an example where like the person wouldn't have even, like in my case, like they didn't even speak to me, but they're like, do you speak English? Or they get astonished when like I respond in proper English. So I think that's an example from lived experience.
So if something is insanely organized, people assume that they are more responsible or better at doing their job. I'm not sure if I Sanjana, do you have a point?
That was to follow up Besma's previous example. So if somebody is like crazy organized, people would just assume they're better at doing their job because of their organization skills.
I don't think that's related to this. I think the whole, and like Sanjana and Erica, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the halo effect is basically like when you establish like a whole story or a list of characteristics around the person based on one quality, but more to your earlier point, I guess more based on superficial things or things where like it's based on lack of knowledge about certain things, like the example I gave in my situation. Is that accurate, Eric and Sanjana?
Yeah, so I mean, here in terms of being organized, it is a very transferable skill, like where you can say, okay, if I'm organized in my personal life, I will also be organized in my, work and my other responsibilities. So that is more of like a relevant skill. That is not the halo effect. But if it was something like that person has a nice house, I'm sure that they would also be able to donate or something like that. Like it's just drawing a not uh, logical parallel between two characteristics. So if I said that I like this person because they spoke to me nicely, doesn't necessarily mean that that person is nice to everybody. So
Okay,
yeah, it's yeah.
I
thank
do
you for the
think
clarification.
I do think in certain industries and certain positions, the beauty bias is an advantage, right? To have and like to act like it's not an advantage is and beneficial for both parties is I get it's unrealistic in my opinion, right? So in sales positions, having someone who's physically more attractive creates higher sales, right? Regardless of whether that's right or wrong, people are more drawn to that. And same goes for industries that where beauty is key, right? So I do think there is a place for it, but I think oftentimes it's used in a way that isn't explainable with pure business metrics or even reasoning. A lot of times it's used as, oh, I like the way that person looks. So like kind of like the halo effect. I like the way you look, so you must be good at keeping yourself together, which means you're probably organized, which probably means you're, I don't know, a very good person to hire in a position where that's not a requirement. Oftentimes that's kind of where the bias, I think, turns negative. Um, and excludes a lot of more qualified individuals from getting that position because maybe that person finds the other person attractive or likes the way they look or present themselves, right? So I think the biases have a good and a bad aspect to it.
I would like to challenge that as well when it comes to the beauty bias and having it a good effect. I think what needs to happen in the future though is that we shouldn't I know that it is hard for us to like as humans and as we go through our everyday lives to keep teaching the beauty bias, but I think we need to take us not only just educate ourselves but also educate everyone around us to maybe get out of that headspace of like, oh, because they're attractive or they look a certain way, they will excel in sales. I think we need to have that conversation going forward to stop that from happening in the future, I think.
I do agree that in the like in an ideal world, that to me, obviously that would be preferable because I don't think anyone should be discriminated against because of a factor that they cannot control, right? Like oftentimes this is something you can't control. You're born a certain way, certain height, a certain body type, right? And so you can't control those things, right? But I do think it does depend on the industry and the customer you're serving, because right now the beauty standard does and I'm speaking specifically sales because that's the most front facing you can get. I do think in certain industries and sectors that is always going to be a beneficial thing because of human nature. But again, it depends on the customers, right? If you're going for like a more eco-friendly branding design, you are more you're going to benefit more from having a more inclusive type of staff, or not having even the most beautiful individual, because a lot of times those values that's not valued by the customers that you're trying to attract, if that makes sense, right? So, but in, for example, high-end fashion or the high-end industry, beauty at the end of the day is a major value added thing for a lot of these higher end customers, right? And so in an ideal world, I do agree. But I don't see that changing anytime soon, at least for the high end space, if that makes sense. But that's just my opinion.
I would just like to jump in on that. While I do agree where you're coming from, and Erica and I are both from a marketing background, so I think we both see what you mean in terms of like, this is what would attract the customers. So that is what you would be more inclined to do. But I think that as entrepreneurs, especially who are, you have the power to change the narrative. So like in India, there's airlines, Air India, which is like Air Canada, but Indian Airlines. There, the air hostesses are no longer like those zero-figure, young women. They hire older age women, even on the plus side, and they wear saris, they wear conservative clothing. So I mean, it's about steering the narrative, and it is difficult. I do agree with you, but I think it's about slightly nudging in the direction. That's what we would hope, and that's what you as entrepreneurs have the power of doing. That's just something I wanted to put out there. But I do agree that it is an idealistic society, but we can make tiny steps in that direction.
And I mean, beauty is like, different people see beauty in a different way. And so like even, companies, whether it's clothing companies or makeup or whatever, like where like the whole beauty piece is an element, like you're saying, Alex. Like now you see, for example, like models of different sizes, of different, where like before it was like the size like 000 kind of like extra small. Now you see more diversity. So I mean, it is already starting to change from even a decade or so ago. And like as they say, like beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So I mean, like someone can be gorgeous in the eyes of one person and like totally ugly in someone, so like I mean, like it's all relative when it comes to whatever defines who's beautiful. So
No, I do agree. I think it's just I agree. I do agree.
yeah. No, you got a point. It's not going to change overnight for sure.
Well, and I think it depends on what society views as beautiful. I think that's a huge factor, because right now a more curvy figure is considered beautiful, while a couple of years it wasn't. It was like, oh, we got to get the skinniest, right? So I think it kind of goes with what society and culture views as beautiful, right? Obviously, it's very subjective. But there is a societal, okay, this is what at this time what's attractive. And so I think a lot of times people will move towards that. So for now, right now, it's more of a plus size model, curvy kind of look that's in. So you're going to see more of that. As soon as that fades into another fad, you'll see another, you know what I'm saying? I don't know if that makes sense, but it fully depends on what society views. But I think the beautifulness, like viewing that person as beautiful, will always be a major key, whether that's a girl that's, skinny, or someone who's on a bigger side, the curvy, right? So I do think the societal standard that depends on, what culture is and what you view as at least objectively beautiful. And you tend to, I think most people tend to gravitate towards that in most scenarios. But I do agree we should probably untrain that part of us and be more inclusive. And my company, the way I'm going to run it is in that way as well, like in a more inclusive way, because again, that's my customers, and it's also part of my belief system. But I am a little bit of a pessimist, so I do think that affects us.
No, I think this has been great. I think for me, I think I need to have a little bit of pessimistic view of things. I am a little bit on that idealistic views. Benjamin says the beauty bias seems necessary in an industry like clothing modeling. Having an attractive person wear certain clothes makes the clothes themselves look better, which will in turn increase sales. That's why clothing companies hire attractive people to model their clothes. With that being said, beauty is subjective. People will find different looks appealing based on their own experiences and feelings. So the goal for most companies is to use the beauty bias to appeal the majority of consumers. I think this should change, but this is currently what business use to ensure maximum profits. But yeah, I think we can all agree on that. And these are great avoidances as well too. So stop exactly what Sanjana was saying. So stop making conclusions before having all of the evidence. Challenging your first impression. So when you first meet someone, making sure that you take a moment to reflect on yourself and what you are thinking when you are meeting that person for the first time. So challenge yourself every single time. Being more how these biases can affect, aware of how these biases can affect how we look at someone. So again, the awareness, slow down your judgment and decision processes. Assessing how you would feel if someone misjudged you based on your own look. So I guess the golden rule, treat others how you want to be treated. So on to the next biases. And this is something as entrepreneurs, as you're going through your market research, I feel like everyone at one point might have had this bias at one certain point, and it is the confirmation bias. So confirmation bias is the tendency to seek out and use information that confirms one's views and expectations. In other words, cherry picking information to validate certain points. This affects our ability to think critically and objectively, which can lead to skewed interpretations of information and overlooking information with opposing views. Although there's gratification in validating a current idea, it's important to consider the potential consequences of following through with that specific idea. So just taking a second, looking back on these last couple of months and seeing if maybe you unconsciously had a confirmation bias as you were doing your market research, possibly. Okay, so with the confirmation bias in your head, how do you think we can avoid it? And being entrepreneurs, going on to this journey, how do you think you can make sure to avoid confirmation bias when it comes to market research and so on? Anna writes, I had the advice on time to test your assumptions by having a team member who tasks it is to disapprove the assumptions as best as they can. That's great. I'm gonna add that. Anna, if you feel comfortable, can you maybe explain that process a little bit more? And I apologize for my clickety clackety keyboard. I know some people might not like the sound, but just apologies.
Hello.
Yes, Andrew, go ahead.
One method you can do with the scientific method, at least one part of it is, instead of trying to prove yourself right, or when you're trying to prove yourself right with a hypothesis, you actively try and go against that. You try and say, okay, if I'm trying to prove that this thing is true, I need to actively try and disprove it. Because if it's true, I should not find anything to disprove it because it's correct. But if you're trying to prove something's right, you're more likely to fall into confirmation bias. It's like, okay, well, these things don't prove it's wrong, so it's right. Yeah, that is what I'm talking about there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Stephanie says, when researching medical journeys, it's really easy to look for information that goes in a particular direction. One way to avoid this is to find general research and then look in other directions. Yes, so having multiple resources and sources when you are looking for information is super important. Thank you, Stephanie. So brainstorm and get different perspectives. Be on the lookout for further information. That's great. Having the space to really think about your decisions and thinking and making sure that there are other options as well too is super important. And listening to different perspectives is super important. Having other different perspectives on a decision is super important because someone's lived experiences may have different outlooks on a certain decision. So that's very important. Thank you, Sahaj. Check the sources of where the information is coming from. Yes, super important. Thank you so much. Does anyone else have anything else to add? Asking the internet or Twitter, they'll always give you differing opinions. I love that. That's great. Another place is Reddit. People are ruthless on Reddit. Thank you, Brele. Talk to someone with a differing view and learn from them. Yes. Knowledge is power. These are great. Thank you so much. And I think that is good for avoidance for confirmation bias. Okay, so next one, conformity bias. Conformity bias is similar to groupthink, which occurs when we change our opinions or behaviors to match that of the bigger group, even if it doesn't reflect our opinions. This bias may occur when we encounter peer pressure or are trying to fit into a certain social group or professional environment. Although conformity can help prevent conflicts, it may also limit creativity, open discussions, and having other perspectives available. Yes, so reflecting on your past experiences, seeing if you've had this unconscious bias before, and then also reflecting on how to not create spaces of conformity bias as well in your venture. So how can we avoid conformity bias?
I would say to encourage diversive thinking. So encouraging opinions that essentially tackle the group think, right? Because I think oftentimes group thinking is just the natural instinct for, especially a like a culture, a workplace where a lot of the people are from the same background, right? So having, even just like as a manager being like, okay, this is what you guys think, like, let's see the opposite of it, right? Like, find me the complete opposite of it and present that to me, right? So kind of see if they can figure out another way, and then maybe from there they can find a solution that uses both kind of minds of thinking. But yeah, encouraging different mindsets and going against the status quo is something that probably will help create more diverse mindsets and stop the conformity.
That's great. Thank you so much for putting that out there. Yeah, so being encouraging of different opinions is super important. And as your ventures grow, I hope that that you, as your team grows, I hope that you are all encouraging everyone around you to oppose opinions and having fueling that creativity is super important, I think. So Hannah writes, finding ways for it to feel safe to express different opinions. Yes, so having that workspace, having an environment around you, or placing an environment that allows different opinions is super important. Thanks, Hannah. Does anyone else have any ways that they can avoid conformity bias within their venture? Having a clear, strong, and committed values that you are willing to stand behind. Obviously, research those values. That's great. I want to dive deep into that as Ecosion. Maybe you can give a little bit more of an example within yourselves in Ecosion of strong and committed values that you seek to have in your venture. And feel free, Rose and Libo, if you want to put it in there. And I'll put you guys on the spot.
I would even encourage you all to think about how, like, conformity within the organization, wherein your team is, you don't want groupthink to happen, but also externally, where, like, okay, all the major organizations in my industry are doing this. Is it something that is sustainable? Is it something that I, as an entrepreneur, need to challenge? Maybe that is also somewhere where conformity bias may set in, that, oh, this is what all the organizations do, maybe I should do the same thing. Is there something along those lines that you think you have had a conformity bias, or you've challenged a conformity bias? Maybe you could even discuss that.
Yes, as entrepreneurs, we hope that you are all changing and challenging the conformity bias. Stephanie writes, have a diverse group of people in the group, different backgrounds and perspectives. Yes.
Elon Musk has a really cool tactic. He fires people for not showing diversity of thought, and risk is encouraged. I mean, obviously within reason, but like coming up with new ideas is highly encouraged and rewarded. But if you're going to sit there and not even try, then he punishes that with termination. I'm not saying terminate people for like not thinking differently, but it's a really novel way of approaching business.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's super intense to fire someone. Yes, Anna, but that's a great example. I think, well, don't fire people, like Zephy says. But yeah, just sorry, go ahead.
That's not me, that's Elon Musk.
Yes. Don't know how we feel about him, but at the moment, but that is great to make sure that we are encouraging different perspectives. And I think even if you're having a meeting with like a whole bunch of people, I think even having a chance for them to write it down as well too. Some people might not be comfortable to say it vocally. So having different ways of sharing their opinion is super important. So making sure that they are accessible to write to you if they want to, or if maybe there's an anonymous poll as well. And especially with as you're growing with contacting your customers, as like maybe doing an anonymous poll, it would be super beneficial for you as well. Okay, I think it's already almost 8 o'clock. So I do want to make sure that there is time for us to talk with one another about justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and dive deeper on that as well. But I highly encourage everyone here to look into other unconscious biases. This Google Jamboard is available on the slide. So if you want to dive in deeper into other unconscious biases, feel free. But I do want to take this chance to speak to everyone. So I'm gonna go back to the PowerPoint and put it to you. And I am gonna put this into the chat. Sage, you put in the value. So one value we stand behind is focusing on impact and authenticity. Whatever we put on social media should be impactful and real in what is happening with fast fashion. Great. Thank you so much. So I'm going to put this in chat. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that hopefully we can see each other. Thank you, Sanjana. Stop sharing. And I just want to have a discussion about how everyone is feeling about justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. How everyone is feeling towards the topic, how it is important to you, or if it's not important to you. Just having an open discussion. And if there is one jetted initiative that your venture can commit to today, what would that be? What or stakeholder group would it be targeted at? Did something today resonate with you, or the async module, so the pre-work that happened, if anything resonated with you? Have you come across anything outside of EDGE which spoke to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion? Oh. Sarah says, in one of my school classes, I did a project about the Indigenous water crisis. Hundreds of Indigenous reserves across Canada not having access to clean water. And I learned a lot about how equity for these people requires improvements in a lot of human rights, like education. Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that.
I think for, at least for Rephilly, I think what we can, I guess, commit to is always providing affordable and sustainable hygienic products for the underrepresented individuals. So providing it at a cost that fits whatever they are, you know, because we have been toying around with like the idea of potentially having a pay forward kind of system where we would have obviously higher expenses in the higher end machines that would go into the higher end neighborhoods, but using the profits from there to subsidize our lower expense options for example, co-ops, because I live in a co-op and co-op housing, so like a more affordable housing community, and my mom manages one, right? So I'm very embedded in this kind of culture. I've pretty much lived predominantly in those communities, and so providing them with like an affordable solution, even if it may cost another group more, I think it's something that I will push forward with Rephilly, and even exploring potentially working with like homeless shelters to have ore machines within those shelters where they can refill their shampoo or whatever cleaning products they need at like no cost, right? Because I mean, they don't have much anyways, but providing them that by charging other groups or other higher end places, that's kind of, I mean, I don't know if that's a pledge or not, but that's kind of what I'm committing to. But yeah, that's me.
Starting it off strong. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's great. In terms of strategies for your venture, and I hope that that continues. Does anyone else have anything to share with their specific venture?
For my venture, I've decided that people with disabilities like function differently in life, and depending on how bad the disability is, obviously impacts the level of work they're able to do and to function in life. And just working with people at their level to what they're able to contribute, and set specific projects aside where there aren't any like critical timelines, so those people have more flexibility in terms of the work that they're able to commit to, rather than, you know, putting a lot of pressure and saying, hurry, 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 this is due tomorrow, and, you know, creating a very stressful environment. And I don't think that's fair to them, and it's not fair to myself. So just really creating options of work for people that are at whatever skill level they're able to commit to.
That's great. And I think that it actually even ties into the last, well, with the whole justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Within that acronym, the last word is like decolonization. And we had that session on decolonizing on entrepreneurship. And I think that actually even ties into that, and making sure that we are maybe even decolonizing like what we think of how we see like a workplace, and making sure that you have those practices in place that make it accessible for everyone. If you have a disability, like what Stephanie was saying, that's great. I hope that's amazing. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else? Otherwise, I am going to be picking on people.
Maybe someone who hasn't contributed yet. Maybe they would like to share something. Benjamin says in the chat, I feel it's absolutely critical to ensure your venture operates while being aware of the diversity within the consumer demographics you plan to reach out to. We want to ensure that the people who play our game can connect with it, regardless of their individual backgrounds. The main goal of a venture is to inspire people, but in order to inspire, we must first be able to connect them to our underlying themes without any form of exclusion. Yes, that's great. Hannah says, I think for a while to be long term, I'd be interested in hiring other artists to create work, and to be mindful of diversity in this aspect will be very important. Yep.
And to dive deeper onto today's session, was there anything today that was like, oh, I haven't thought of implementing that in my venture? Maybe it's hiring practices, maybe it's how you interact with other people within the community. diversifying the people within your community. No? Okay.
But I really like that circle of trust activity.
Yeah, that it broadens your people within your community is very important.
I realized I have a lot of very, very old friends. Like the average age is like 60, 70.
Oh, that's nice. Well, what's actually great about that is that that's the difference within your own specific age range as well too. So like that is also kind of diversifying a little bit.
Yeah, no, it was really cool to break it down in terms of all of these different demographics, and everything else is like super, super diverse, but like the age range is pretty old. But I thought that was a really interesting way to, I guess, look at people and just like, how they stack up on a metric scale.
Mhm. Does anyone else have anything to add? Considering the different types of biases is something I wouldn't usually do. As we move forward with the development of our venture, I would definitely think about my own personal approach when making a design decision for our game. That's great. Is there a specific biases that you were thinking, oh, like maybe I should be more aware of it in the development of the game? Conformity bias. Great. Thank you so much, Benjamin, for sharing.
I think, as we discussed earlier, that the biggest aspect of this topic, jaded, is that continuous learning, and that knowing that you will not always know everything. So being open, keeping your mind and heart open to sometimes accepting that you're wrong, and that making better and doing better. So I had a resource that I found while doing research for this topic, where a brand spoke about mistakes that they had made in the past and how they had corrected it. So I'll just share the link in the chat in case anyone is interested in that.
Thank you, Sanjana. Okay, I think no one else has anything to share. We'll go over the assignment from tonight. Cool. All right, so I will share my screen again. Okay, so we will be having an assignment that is going to be not due this Sunday, but the next, which is going to be the same night of the end of term reflection due date. So we are asking for everyone to refer to a specific article to see how you can create a concrete JEDD, so justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and decolonization plan for your venture. So there are 9 steps in the process, and we are asking you to please list 2 to 3 bullet points for each step on how you would apply it to your venture. There is an assignment Dropbox on Slate, and it's called Creating a Jetted Plan for Your Venture. Some of the steps might be a little bit out of reach, specifically where you are at your stage of your venture, but maybe realistically looking into the future of what you hope to do within those 2 to 3 bullet points. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. I think it's great. That is the end of the session. And we are currently asking, hopefully, for everyone's, what's it called? Feedback for tonight's session. And I'll put it in the link into the chat. But if anyone has any questions or concerns, feel free to let us know, and I'll put the link for the feedback into the chat. But yeah, thank you so much for everyone for joining us tonight, and hopefully you take all of these approaches and biases and make sure that you keep this in mind when you are interacting with others, how you do your ventures, and have these approaches in your everyday lives. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. So Jenna, I don't know if you have any other last remarks.
No, I just want to thank everybody for their participation and making this session so interactive and engaging. So thank you for your contribution.
Thanks so much.
Bye, guys.
Bye.